Before we begin, let me ask you something. How do 7 men hold off 20,000 enemies for an entire night? Not 700, not 70, 7. 7 samurai defending a single castle gate against an army that could have simply walked over them. This is not a movie. This is not legend embellished over centuries. This happened on July 5, 1590, at Tamanawa Castle in Japan, and it is one of the most lopsided defensive stands in military history. This is the story of the 7 samurai of Hōjō, the story of impossible courage, and the story of how 7 warriors bought their clan enough time to survive the night that should have ended everything. No exaggeration, no mythology. Just 7 men, 1 gate, and an army that could not break through. If this video teaches you something new, here's all I'm asking: hit that like button, drop a comment, share it with someone who thinks they know samurai history. We are building something here, a place where the battles that textbooks ignore get told the way they deserve. Now let's go back to 1590, to the end of the Sengoku period, because to understand why 7 samurai fought 20,000, you need to see what they were fighting for and why they had no choice but to hold that gate or die trying. Japan in 1590 was unified, or nearly so, after a century of constant warfare. The Sengoku period, the Warring States era, had torn Japan apart. Hundreds of daimyo, feudal lords, fought for control of provinces, alliances shifted overnight, and survival meant conquest or extinction. But by 1590, one man had emerged victorious. Toyotomi Hideyoshi, the peasant who became a general, who became the de facto ruler of Japan, had spent a decade crushing rival clans and forcing submission. He was not from a noble family. He was born a peasant, rose through the ranks under Oda Nobunaga, and after Nobunaga's assassination, seized power and continued the unification. By 1590, almost all of Japan knelt to Hideyoshi. Almost all. One clan refused: the Hōjō. The Hōjō clan controlled the Kanto region, the area around modern-day Tokyo, and they were powerful. They ruled from Odawara Castle, one of the most formidable fortresses in Japan, and commanded tens of thousands of samurai and ashigaru foot soldiers. The Hōjō had been independent for generations, never bowing to Kyoto, never submitting to whoever claimed to rule Japan. They were proud, militarily strong, and they believed Odawara was impregnable. Hideyoshi sent envoys demanding submission. The Hōjō refused, so Hideyoshi decided to take the Kanto by force. In 1590, he mobilized the largest army Japan had ever seen, over 200,000 men, and marched east to destroy the Hōjō once and for all. The Hōjō strategy was simple: retreat into their castles, wait out the siege, and let Hideyoshi's massive army exhaust itself. Hideyoshi's forces would run out of supplies, his coalition of allied daimyo would fracture, and the siege would fail. It was a reasonable plan. Odawara Castle had never fallen to siege. It was surrounded by massive stone walls, moats, and earthworks. The garrison was well supplied and well trained. The Hōjō believed they could outlast Hideyoshi, but Hideyoshi did not just besiege Odawara. He besieged every Hōjō castle simultaneously, cutting off the clan from reinforcements and resupply. He sent detachments to capture or blockade every Hōjō stronghold in the Kanto. Tamanawa Castle was one of them. Tamanawa Castle, located near the coast in what is now Kanagawa Prefecture, was a small fortification, a secondary castle meant to guard the approaches to Odawara. It was not a massive fortress. It was a modest hilltop structure with wooden walls, a few towers, and a garrison of perhaps a few hundred men at full strength. But in July 1590, Tamanawa Castle was almost empty. Most of the garrison had been pulled back to Odawara to reinforce the main defense. Only a skeleton crew remained, samurai and ashigaru tasked with holding the castle for as long as possible and delaying any enemy force trying to use it as a base. The commander was Matsuda Norihide, a Hōjō retainer, and he had perhaps 200 men under his command. Against the tens of thousands besieging Odawara, 200 men was nothing, but Matsuda's orders were clear: hold the castle, deny it to the enemy, buy time for Odawara, so he prepared to do exactly that. Hideyoshi's forces arrived at Tamanawa in late June 1590. The besieging force was commanded by Tokugawa Ieyasu, one of Hideyoshi's most powerful and capable allies, the future shogun who would rule Japan after Hideyoshi's death. Ieyasu commanded over 30,000 men, and he surrounded Tamanawa Castle, cutting it off from any hope of relief or escape. Matsuda and his garrison were trapped. Ieyasu sent messengers offering terms, surrender the castle, and the garrison would be allowed to leave unharmed. Matsuda refused. His orders were to hold the castle, and he would hold it until ordered otherwise or until everyone was dead. Ieyasu, who respected courage even in his enemies, prepared for a siege, but he did not have time for a long siege. Hideyoshi wanted the Kanto secured quickly, and every day spent at Tamanawa was a day not spent supporting the main siege at Odawara. Ieyasu decided to take the castle by storm. On July 5, 1590, Ieyasu launched a full assault on Tamanawa Castle. Thousands of soldiers attacked the walls from multiple directions, scaling ladders, battering the gates, firing arrows and arquebus shots. The garrison fought back desperately, but they were outnumbered more than 100 to 1. The walls were breached. The outer defenses fell. Matsuda's men retreated to the inner keep, the donjon, the last defensible position. The fighting was brutal, hand-to-hand combat in the courtyards and corridors, samurai cutting down ashigaru overwhelming samurai with spears and numbers. By late afternoon, the castle was effectively lost. Most of the garrison was dead or captured. Matsuda Norihide was killed fighting in the keep. The castle was in enemy hands. Ieyasu's men began securing the structure, putting out fires, treating the wounded, and preparing to use Tamanawa as a forward base. The siege was over, except it was not. One section of the castle had not fallen. The Otemon, the main gate, the primary entrance to the castle, was still held by a tiny group of Hōjō samurai who refused to surrender. When Matsuda fell and the keep was overrun, 7 samurai fighting near the gate made a decision. They would hold the gate for as long as possible, denying Ieyasu's forces full control of the castle and buying time for any survivors to escape or for reinforcements that they knew were not coming. It was a suicide mission, and they knew it. But they were samurai, and their duty was to their lord and their clan, even if their lord was dead and their clan was dying. They barricaded the gate, fortified the gatehouse, and prepared to fight until they were killed, 7 men. Against an army of 20,000 soldiers already inside and around the castle. It should have lasted minutes. It lasted all night. The 7 samurai were not named in most historical records, a tragic anonymity that robs them of individual recognition. Later chronicles and Hōjō clan histories identify some of them, though the names vary depending on the source. What is consistent is that they were experienced warriors, veterans of the Sengoku Wars, men who had fought for the Hōjō for years and had no illusions about their chances. They were not trying to win. They were trying to delay, to deny, to make the enemy pay for every inch. And they did. The Otemon Gate was a defensible position, a narrow passageway flanked by thick wooden walls and a heavy timber gate reinforced with iron. The gatehouse above the passage was a fortified tower with arrow slits and firing positions. The 7 samurai positioned themselves in and around the gatehouse, using the architecture to create choke points where numbers did not matter. The gate became a killing ground. Ieyasu's commanders, consolidating control of the castle, sent a detachment to clear the gate. 50 ashigaru, foot soldiers armed with yari spears, advanced into the gate passage. The 7 samurai were waiting. They attacked from the gatehouse above, dropping stones, firing arrows, and then descending into the passage with swords and spears. The fighting was vicious, confined to a space barely 10 meters wide. The ashigaru could not bring their numbers to bear. They crowded together, blocking each other, while the samurai cut them down. The ashigaru broke and retreated, leaving a dozen dead in the passage. The samurai refortified the gate and waited. Ieyasu's officers were frustrated. The castle was taken, the garrison was defeated, and yet 7 men were holding a single gate and killing anyone who tried to pass. They sent more men, 100 this time, with orders to rush the gate and overwhelm the defenders. The samurai met them with a hail of arrows and stones, then engaged in the passage again. The confined space was an advantage. The attackers could only come a few at a time, and the samurai, trained in close combat since childhood, were far more skilled than the average ashigaru. The second assault failed. More attackers died. The samurai, wounded but still fighting, held the gate. Iyasu's officers debated burning the gate down, but they wanted the structure intact for their own use. They decided to wait the defenders out, starve them, force a surrender. The 7 samurai had no food, no water, and no reinforcements. They would collapse eventually, or so the attackers thought. Night fell. The fighting paused. Iyasu's men lit torches and campfires around the gate, illuminating the area and preventing the defenders from escaping under cover of darkness. The 7 samurai, exhausted and wounded, rested in the gatehouse, taking turns watching the approaches, treating their injuries with torn cloth and whatever medical supplies they had. They knew dawn would bring another assault, probably in overwhelming force, and they would die. But they also knew that every hour they held the gate was an hour Iyasu's forces could not fully use the castle, an hour of disruption, an hour of delay. That was their mission now, not survival, delay, and they would delay as long as breath remained in their bodies. Around midnight, Iyasu's patience ran out. He ordered a night assault, a massive coordinated attack using fire, projectiles, and sheer numbers to crush the remaining defenders. Hundreds of soldiers surrounded the gate, archers and arquebusiers positioned to fire into the gatehouse, assault troops ready to storm the passage the moment the defenders were suppressed. The attack began with a volley of fire arrows, dozens of flaming projectiles arcing through the darkness and slamming into the gatehouse. The wooden structure caught fire, smoke filled the air. The samurai, coughing and half-blind, retreated from the upper floors as the fire spread. They took up positions in the passage below, swords drawn, ready for the rush they knew was coming. Iyasu's assault troops charged into the passage, spears forward, shields raised, moving in formation. They expected to find the defenders dead or incapacitated from smoke inhalation. They found 7 samurai standing in the smoke, swords ready, and they paid for their assumption. The samurai attacked with the fury of men who had nothing left to lose. They cut into the front ranks, swords flashing in the firelight, killing and wounding with every strike. The passage became a slaughterhouse again. The attackers, despite their numbers, were funneled into a space where only a few could fight at once, and those few died. The assault stalled, then broke. The surviving attackers retreated, dragging their wounded, leaving the passage choked with bodies. The 7 samurai, bleeding, burned, gasping for air, held the gate. Iyasu's officers were baffled and furious. They had thrown hundreds of men at 7 defenders and failed repeatedly. The gate was on fire, the defenders should be dead, and yet they were still fighting. Reports reached Ieyasu himself, who was overseeing the wider siege operations from his command post. He was told about the 7 samurai holding the gate against impossible odds, refusing to surrender, killing scores of his men. Ieyasu, who would later become famous for his patience and strategic thinking, recognized what he was witnessing. This was not just resistance. This was Bushido, the way of the warrior, taken to its absolute extreme. 7 men were embodying the samurai ideal: loyalty unto death, courage in the face of annihilation, and absolute refusal to yield. Ieyasu reportedly said that such men deserved respect, not just destruction, and he ordered his commanders to offer terms one more time. A messenger approached the burning gate and shouted an offer: surrender now, and the 7 would be allowed to commit seppuku with honor rather than being killed like dogs. The samurai refused. They would hold the gate until they could not. The messenger withdrew. The attacks resumed. The next assault came before dawn, as the fires in the gatehouse burned low and the structure began to collapse. Iyasu's forces, determined to end this before daylight, launched another mass attack, this time with no intention of taking prisoners. Hundreds of soldiers stormed the gate from multiple angles, some climbing over the rubble of the collapsed gatehouse, others pushing through the passage, all of them screaming war cries and determined to finish the defenders. The 7 samurai, exhausted, wounded, some barely able to stand, met them one last time. The fighting was desperate, chaotic, lit by the dying fires and the pre-dawn gloom. The samurai fought with swords, spears, broken weapons, anything they could use. They killed attackers even as they were being cut down themselves. One by one, the 7 fell. No retreat, no surrender. They died in the gate passage, surrounded by the bodies of the men they had killed, having held that position for over 12 hours against an army of 20,000. When the sun rose on July 6, 1590, Ieyasu's men finally controlled the entire castle, including the Otemon Gate. The bodies of the 7 samurai were found in the passage and the rubble of the gatehouse, surrounded by over 100 dead attackers. The exact count varies by source, but most accounts agree that the 7 samurai killed or wounded at least 100 to 150 enemy soldiers during the night-long defense. Ieyasu, when he toured the castle and saw the carnage at the gate, ordered that the 7 be buried with honor. He reportedly said that men who fought like that were the embodiment of the samurai spirit, and even though they were enemies, they deserved respect. The bodies were recovered, given proper funeral rites, and buried near the castle. A small monument was later erected, though its exact location has been lost to history. The defense of the Otemon Gate did not change the outcome of the siege. Tamanawa Castle fell, the Hōjō clan fell. Odawara Castle surrendered in August 1590 after a 3-month siege, and the Hōjō leadership either committed seppuku or was executed. The clan was destroyed, its lands divided among Hideyoshi's allies, and the Kanto region came under Tokugawa control. The 7 samurai bought time, but it was not enough to save their clan. But their stand became legendary not because it changed history, but because it embodied something timeless, the refusal to give up even when defeat is certain. The determination to fulfill your duty, even when it costs everything, and the courage to face overwhelming odds with nothing but a sword and a commitment to your cause. The story of the 7 samurai of Hōjō was passed down through oral tradition, mentioned in Hōjō clan records, and eventually recorded in Edo period histories. It inspired countless retellings, artworks, and later, possibly influenced Akira Kurosawa's famous film, 7 Samurai, though Kurosawa's film is set in a different period and has a different plot. The core idea, 7 warriors standing against impossible odds, resonates through Japanese culture. The historical 7 at Tamanawa were not protecting a village from bandits. They were protecting a gate from an army, and they succeeded for a night when they should have been overrun in minutes. But let's talk about how it worked, because 7 men holding off 20,000 is absurd on the surface. The numbers make it seem impossible, and yet it happened. Why? How? First, geography and architecture. The Otemon Gate was a force multiplier. It was a narrow, confined space where the attackers' numerical advantage was negated. Ieyasu had 20,000 men at Tamanawa, but only a few dozen could attack the gate at any given time. The passage was too narrow for mass assaults. The defenders, positioned in and above the passage, could fight on roughly equal terms against each wave of attackers. In open ground, 7 men against hundreds would be annihilated in seconds. In a narrow gate passage, 7 skilled warriors could hold indefinitely against successive waves. The architecture turned the battle into a series of small, confined melees where skill mattered more than numbers. Second, skill and training. These were not peasant conscripts or part-time soldiers. They were samurai, professional warriors who had trained in swordsmanship, spear fighting, archery, and unarmed combat since childhood. They had fought in real battles, survived the chaos of the Sengoku Wars, and knew how to kill efficiently. The Ashigaru attacking them were less trained, often farmers drafted into service, given a spear and minimal training, and told to fight. In confined combat, the skill gap was decisive. A trained samurai could kill several ashigaru in the time it took the ashigaru to organize an effective response. Multiply that by 7 samurai, and you have a defensive force that could hold a choke point against vastly superior numbers. Third, desperation and commitment. The 7 samurai were fighting a suicide mission, and they knew it. They were not trying to survive. They were trying to delay, to kill as many enemies as possible, to make the enemy pay for every inch. That kind of fatalistic determination is terrifying to face. Soldiers attacking the gate knew they were being sent into a meat grinder, and morale suffered. Ashigaru, who were not bound by Bushido and had no personal loyalty to the Tokugawa cause, hesitated, hung back, and died when their commanders forced them forward. The samurai, by contrast, had no hesitation. They attacked with the ferocity of men who had already accepted death. That psychological edge matters. Fear is contagious, and so is courage. Fourth, the attackers' constraints. Ieyasu's forces wanted to take the gate intact if possible, which limited their options. They could not use heavy siege equipment or explosives without destroying the structure they wanted to use. They tried fire, but the samurai adapted and kept fighting. The attackers were forced to clear the gate by assault, which meant sending men into a killing ground repeatedly. If Ieyasu had been willing to completely destroy the gate, he could have done so with overwhelming firepower, but that would have defeated the purpose of capturing the castle as a usable base. Fifth, the night. Darkness made coordination difficult for the attackers. Assaulting a fortified position at night, even with torches, is chaotic and dangerous. Friendly fire is common, visibility is poor, and discipline breaks down. The defenders, who were stationary and familiar with the terrain, had the advantage. They could hear the attackers coming, see their silhouettes against the torches, and strike from the darkness. The night stretched the battle out, gave the defenders time to rest between assaults, and made every attack more costly for the enemy. Sixth, leadership paralysis. Ieyasu's officers underestimated the defenders repeatedly. They sent 50 men, then 100, then more, each time expecting to overwhelm the gate quickly. When each assault failed, they hesitated, debated, and wasted time rather than committing overwhelming force immediately. If they had sent 1,000 men in the first assault, the gate would have fallen within minutes. But they did not, because 7 defenders did not seem to warrant that level of response. By the time they realized how formidable the defense was, the 7 had already killed dozens and entrenched themselves psychologically and physically. The attackers' incremental escalation gave the defenders time to adapt and hold. And seventh, luck. The samurai were lucky. Lucky that none of them were killed outright in the first assault. Lucky that the fires did not collapse the entire gatehouse immediately. Lucky that the attackers made tactical mistakes. Lucky that exhaustion and wounds did not incapacitate all of them at once. In battle, luck is always a factor, and the 7 had just enough to survive through the night. But they also made their luck by fighting smart, using the terrain, and refusing to break. The story of the 7 samurai of Hōjō is a case study in how small forces can delay or defeat larger ones under the right conditions. Military history is full of examples. The Spartans at Thermopylae, Horatius at the bridge, the defenders of Rorke's Drift. The pattern is always the same: a defensible position, a small group of highly motivated defenders, and an attacker who cannot bring their full strength to bear. The 7 samurai at Tamanawa fit that pattern perfectly. They were not superhuman. They were well-trained, well-positioned, and absolutely determined. That was enough. The Hōjō clan's destruction marked the end of the Sengoku period. With the Kanto under his control, Hideyoshi had unified Japan. He redistributed the Hōjō lands to his allies, with Tokugawa Ieyasu receiving the bulk of the Kanto region and moving his base to Edo, which would later become Tokyo. The Hōjō retainers who survived were scattered, some becoming ronin, masterless samurai, others entering service with new lords. The clan's castles were dismantled or repurposed. Tamanawa Castle fell into ruin, and today nothing remains of the original structure. The site is marked by a small park and a memorial stone, but the gate where 7 men held off an army is gone, erased by time and urban development. The 7 samurai were not the only ones who made last stands during the fall of the Hōjō. Dozens of similar stories exist, samurai and ashigaru defending hopeless positions, choosing death over surrender, buying time for their lord or their comrades. The Sengoku period was full of such men, warriors who lived and died by Bushido, the way of the warrior, a code that valued loyalty, courage, and honor above life itself. By modern standards, it seems irrational, suicidal, a waste of life. But to the samurai, it was the only way to live. To abandon your post, to flee, to surrender without fighting to the death was shameful, a stain on your name and your family. Death in battle was not a tragedy, it was the fulfillment of your purpose. That mindset is hard for modern audiences to understand. We live in a world where survival is the highest priority, where surrendering to save lives is rational and admirable. But the samurai lived in a different world, where honor and duty outweighed survival, where death was not an end, but a validation of the life you lived. The 7 samurai at Tamanawa were not trying to survive. They were trying to die well, to fulfill their duty, to defend their lord's castle until they could not. And they did. They died well, fighting to the last, and their names, even if lost to history, are remembered in the collective memory of their stand. Tokugawa Ieyasu, who witnessed the aftermath of the defense, carried the memory of that night with him. Ieyasu was a pragmatist, a man who understood power, loyalty, and the importance of image. He knew that stories of courage and loyalty inspired others, and he used such stories to build his own regime. After Hideyoshi's death in 1598, Ieyasu maneuvered for control of Japan, eventually winning at the Battle of Sekigahara in 1600 and becoming shogun in 1603. His Tokugawa shogunate would rule Japan for over 250 years, and the samurai code of Bushido, exemplified by men like the 7 at Tamanawa, became central to the Tokugawa state's ideology. The 7 samurai did not know it, but their last stand became part of the foundation of the regime that replaced their clan. The story was retold in the Edo period during the Tokugawa shogunate as a moral tale about loyalty and courage. It appeared in war chronicles, kabuki plays, and samurai manuals. The details varied, some versions added names, others embellished the fighting, but the core story remained. 7 men held a gate against an army for a night. It became a standard against which other acts of courage were measured. Samurai children were told the story to teach them about duty and sacrifice. It was propaganda, in a sense, but it was also true, and the truth gave it power. In modern Japan, the story of the 7 samurai of Hōjō is less well known than other Sengoku legends, overshadowed by more famous battles and more famous warriors. But in local histories, in Kanagawa Prefecture, where Tamanawa Castle stood, the story is remembered. The site has a small memorial, and every year on the anniversary of the battle, local history groups hold a commemoration. It is modest, nothing like the grand memorials at places like Sekigahara or Osaka Castle, but it honors the memory of 7 men who did the impossible. The story also raises questions about the nature of heroism. Were the 7 samurai heroes, or were they victims of a system that demanded they throw their lives away for a lost cause? Were they brave, or were they brainwashed by Bushido ideology into committing suicide for a feudal lord who would not have cared if they lived or died? Modern historians debate this. Some see the 7 as tragic figures trapped by a code that valued death over life. Others see them as heroes who made a conscious choice to fight for something bigger than themselves, knowing the cost and accepting it. Both interpretations are valid, and perhaps the truth is somewhere in between. The 7 were products of their time, shaped by a culture that glorified sacrifice, but they were also individuals who made choices in a desperate situation. They chose to fight, and they died fighting. That deserves respect, even if we do not agree with the ideology that led to their deaths. The military lessons of Tamanawa are still relevant. Small forces in defensible positions can delay or defeat much larger forces if they fight smart. Choke points, narrow passages, urban terrain, all of these environments favor defenders and negate numerical advantages. Modern infantry tactics still emphasize the importance of terrain, fields of fire, and prepared positions. The Seven Samurai intuitively understood these principles and applied them perfectly. They did not win in the sense of surviving, but they achieved their objective: delay the enemy, deny them easy victory, make them pay. That is a tactical success, even in defeat. The story of the Seven Samurai of Hōjō is ultimately a story about duty and sacrifice. 7 men were given an impossible task: hold a castle that had already fallen. They could have surrendered, fled, or hidden, and no one would have blamed them. Their lord was dead, their clan was dying, and the war was lost. But they fought anyway, not because they believed they could win, but because it was their duty. They held a gate for a night against an army, killed over 100 enemies, and died without retreating an inch. That is extraordinary, not because it changed history, but because it revealed what human beings are capable of when they commit fully to a cause. The 7 did not need to be named. Their actions are their monument, and their story is their legacy.